So welcome to the second installment of the CAU Cinema and Media Studies Colloquium for 2022 semester. My name is Jiun Kim, Professor of Cinema and Media Studies at Chungang University. We are very honored to have Professor Shane Denson as today's speaker. So let me introduce him before we get started. Shane is Associate Professor of Film and Media Studies in the Department of Art and Art History at Stanford University. He is also Director of the PhD program in Modern Thought and Literature. He's also co-editor with the Wendy Hee-kyung-jeon of the book series entitled Sensing Media, published in Stanford University Press. He's the author of two books, first, Post-Naturalism, Frankenstein Film, and Anthropotechnical Interface, published in Transcript Berak in 2014, and Discorreality Images, published in Duke University Press, which is the main subject of today's talk. And he's also co-editor of several collections, including Transnational Perspectives on Graphic Narrative in 2013, Digital Seriality in 2014, and most importantly, Post-Cinema, Serializing 21st Century Film in 2016. He is currently completing a book on embodiment in an age of algorithms, tentatively titled Post-Cinematic Bodies. So today's the talk title of today's talk by Shane is Images of Discorrealtions, or the Place of Experience in Post-Cinema. So for those who want to listen to his talk with the live captions, you can activate live transcript function on the bottom of the menu on the Zoom. So please welcome Professor Shane Denson. Shane?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jihoon. Thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for coming out or tuning in, or whatever we want to call it, on Zoom. Let me share my screen real quick. Yeah, I wish I could have been there in person, but Zoom will have to do for this time, but maybe another time I can make it out over there. Can everybody hear me okay? Is this audio okay? All right, yep. Good. Okay, so as Jihoon was saying, yeah, the talk is called Images of Discorrelation, or the Place of Experience in Post-Cinema. So this talk draws on and introduces my book, Discorrelated Images, which Jihoon just mentioned, published by Duke University Press in 2020 during the darkest days of the pandemic, really. So I'm gonna start by giving you a brief overview, a brief introduction to the project as a whole, and then I'll focus on one exemplary moment that I think kind of illustrates and illuminates how contemporary images are dispersed between algorithms and aesthetics, or between computational processes and human experience. So finally, at the end, I'll come back and I'll zoom back out to a higher altitude, and I'll try to explain what I take to be the existential and ecological stakes of the project as a whole. So first, the overview of my project. Discorrelated Images, the book, explores the transitional space-time between cinema and post-cinema. More precisely, it probes the transformational temporal and spatial articulations of contemporary moving images and our perceptual, actional, and affective interfaces with them as they migrate from conventional forms of cinema and enter into the computational systems that now encompass virtually every aspect of audiovisual mediation. While the generation, composition, distribution, and playback of images increasingly become a matter of algorithms, software, networks, and codecs, our sensory ratios, as Marshall McLuhan called them, are being reordered our perceptual faculties are being reformed in accordance with the new speeds and scales of imaging processes. In a post-cinematic media regime, that is, both the subjects and the objects of perception are radically transformed. Older relations, such as that between a human subject and a photographically fixed object, are dissolving, and new relations are being forged in the microtemporal intervals of algorithmic processing. With the new objects of computational images emerge new subjectivities, new affects, and uncertain potentials for perception and action. At the heart of these transformations lie the generative dynamics of high-speed and often real-time feedback and feed-forward processes, which introduce and modulate new contingencies at the heart of post-cinematic mediation. We glimpse such processes in digital glitches, for example, which derail perception and inject the microtemporal misfirings of the computer into our subjective awareness. And we, of course, see these all the time on Zoom, right? The underlying contingencies, however, are beyond the purview of subjective perception. The algorithms and hardware operations responsible for the glitch are fundamentally discorrelated from phenomenological processes of noetic intentionality or awareness. Moreover, the glitch reveals a more general instability attaching to computationally mediated images, which are highly volatile and always in danger of dissolution. Processed on the fly in an interval that is inaccessible to human perception, the images that populate our world are themselves discorrelated from human subjectivity. Nevertheless, various forms and manifestations of contemporary audiovisual media mediate to us these processes, providing sensory complements to sub-perceptual events, helping us in a sense to negotiate the transition to a truly post-human or post-perceptual media regime. These mediations and negotiations are the core focus of the book. Discorrelated images engages, in other words, with the transactions between human and machinic agencies as they together broker the ongoing transition from cinematic to post-cinematic media. Framed as such, the project must answer to a number of objections at the outset. For example, isn't the death of cinema a tired cliché? And isn't the very notion of post-cinema therefore superfluous? The machinery of cinema has changed, to be sure, but the cinema thrives even in a computerized world. Indeed, there's no hard break, no bright line between cinema and post-cinema. The vision of post-cinema advocated here is not predicated on cinema's end, but rather its envelopment within the larger space of an environment that has been thoroughly transformed by the operation of computational processing. There are real continuities between the experience of going to the cinema in the age of celluloid and that of watching movies stored and screened by way of digital apparatuses. We still consume moving images, and these moving images still mediate stories and other recognizably perceptual contents. But in focusing on these continuities, we risk overlooking the volatility or the contingency of the correlation of subject and object, which in the age of computational processing teeters precariously atop microtemporal processes that are radically different in speed and scale from human perception. The perceptual correlation, in other words, pertains to a level of phenomenal experience that is abstracted from and systematically blind to the underlying discorrelation. And yet, I argue the underlying discorrelation transforms our experience in important and far-reaching ways. Some of these effects are more readily apparent, like the sensation of being blown away by the ostentatious display of new visual effects, or simply taking notice of formal changes introduced through nonlinear editing and digital color grading. Other experiential effects are less obvious. For example, the subtle confusion between diegetic and extra-diegetic spaces introduced through a digitally simulated lens flare, which at once simulates the physics of an analog camera that asks merely to be looked through in order that we may perceive the simulated reality beyond, while also embracing the goal of ostentatious display. begging to be looked at for its stunning simulation of reality, right down to the interplay of light and a non-existent lens. Phenomena of this sort refuse easy resolution. In oscillating between invisibility and display, or between the subjective and the objective poles of experience, the virtual camera defies traditional phenomenological analysis. The CGI lens flare points, therefore, to the discorrelation of perceptual objects from viewing subjects, and thus to the need to locate the experiential impact of contemporary images at a deeper level of affective materiality and embodiment. Digital glitches, lens flares, and other such figures serve as concise emblems of discorrelation, and I read the films, videos, and media objects that employ them as parables of the experiential transformations that ensue as a result of our encounters with the underlying processes of computation and its altogether non-human affectivities. For example, there's a remarkable and often remarked scene a little over halfway into Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049 that might serve as such a philosophical parable about our changing media landscape and the uncertain relations that it generates between human life and perception on the one hand, and the spatio-temporal situations created by digital images on the other. The scene in question is a sex scene involving three characters: the Blade Runner known as K, played by Ryan Gosling, his AI-powered and holographically projected girlfriend Joy, played by Ana de Armas, and a sex worker named Mariette, played by Mackenzie Davis, who's been hired to lend Joy a tangible body in order to make love to K. This unusual menage a trois requires Mariette to stand in corporeally for the immaterial Joy, whose likeness is projected onto the sex worker's body, thereby forming a composite of the two characters. And indeed, compositing is the technique used to merge the two actors' bodies in digital screen space. But rather than blending the two women together into a perfect, seamless union, and it was certainly within the power of the visual effects team to do so, Joy's and Mariette's images remain distinct from one another, slipping in and out of phase in imperfect alignment. The emphatic seamfulness of this union, the fact that we see the seams between them, is foregrounded as a visual spectacle in its own right. As a spectacle, it's staged not as something to be taken for granted, but as something that has to be achieved. Thus, before the composited women can jointly make love to K, they must, with some effort, be synced up with one another. They have to be synchronized. So Mariette stands facing K while Joy slowly approaches. The two women regard each other briefly, and Joy tries to match Mariette's position in the room. The holographic woman flickers slightly while she gets into position. The two roughly aligned women shift back and forth and look in opposite directions. Then they raise their right hands and look down to inspect them. The camera cuts to a subjective shot, either from one or both of the women's perspectives. The hands are waved back and forth several times, one of them lagging noticeably behind the motions of the other, until they suddenly snap into place and line up visually with one another. Cutting back to the women's faces, still visibly out of phase, Mariette smiles and says with some amazement, "Look at you," thus giving voice to the movie's self-reflexive display of its effects, which demand the viewer to look at them. Joy more seriously responds, "Quiet, now I have to sync." And now, indeed, the women's faces line up and their bodies line up, but they continue in the following to alternate between the one and the other as more focally dominant, just as if someone were playing with the transparency settings of each layer in Photoshop or After Effects. Because the synchronization remains incomplete, it retains an obstinate visibility. It's something to be looked at. The scene is therefore something like those visual effects reels that digital effects studios upload to YouTube or Vimeo to show off their work. videos that peel back the multiple composited layers of CGI textures, particle physics, and simulated lighting to reveal the technical complexity behind the finished images in blockbuster movies, a complexity that is otherwise invisible in its seamless integration. But here, through intentionally sceneful compositing, the execution of visual effects is put on display in the movie itself. Paradoxically, the very failure of integration is situated as a visual spectacle. The image's imperfect temporal synchronization and seamful spatial alignment serve to focus the movie's thematic interrogation of boundaries between human and artificial being, between life and non-life, between real and fake. And just prior to syncing with Mariette, Joy assures Kay, "It's okay, she's real. I want to be real for you." But staged in this way, the images also layer atop this questioning a further interest in imaging processes themselves, an interest that is motivated narratively by the presence of the holographic Joy, of course, but that goes beyond that level and aims squarely at a problematization of the images on the spectator's screen. The scene therefore synthesizes or composites these levels materially. The question of the digitally mediated image becomes transposable with the question of the definition of human life and perception itself. So, like the characters on screen, the spectator too is enlisted in a questioning that might be termed the problem of edge detection. Joy's struggle to stay in sync with Mariette translates a computationally demanding task of matching a moving object's visible outline in real time. Kay's job as Blade Runner of discerning between human and non-human entities is twisted into an effort to see, both visually and conceptually, the two women as one without thereby confusing them. And the viewer is tasked with mediating between diegetic and non-diegetic complications of the image, along with the resulting thematic and material confusions of human and technological agencies. Technically speaking, edge detection refers to a set of computational processes that are fundamental to machine vision, computer vision, and automated image processing. Edge detection encompasses algorithms that identify discontinuities in brightness within digital images, extracting line segments called edges that correspond ideally to the actual edges of physical objects or symbols. Edge detection is implemented in applications ranging from optical character recognition, automatic license plate readers, industrial robotics, drones, and self-driving cars, and other areas where a computational system is responsible for detecting, recognizing, classifying, or processing visual phenomena. Abstracting from this technical understanding, we might relate the concept of edge detection to broader issues of perception in an age of digital mediation. As the technical implementations of edge detection algorithms demonstrate, many contemporary images are radically discorrelated from human perception. And even the ones that we see with our own eyes are impacted by the transformative effects of computational processing. From popular worries over the veracity of images in an age of Photoshop and CGI, to scholarly debates over the loss of indexicality and its meaning for our experience of moving images, the shift from a cinematic to a post-cinematic media regime has introduced all sorts of uncertainties into our relationships with images and the underlying technologies that produce and support them. Nearly all of the images that we see today, whether in a movie theater equipped with digital video projectors, on a smart TV connected to digital cable or a Blu-ray player, on a handheld device or a computer screen streaming video from the internet, or on Zoom here. Virtually all of these images have been processed by a computer prior to our seeing them. And much of this processing is done on the fly. For example, video decompression, upscaling, or motion smoothing. At stake in these processes are, among other things, the edges that visually define the objects of our perception. Compression algorithms, which are responsible for making playback and streaming more efficient by reducing the amount of digital information that must be processed at any given time, work by eliminating perceptually extraneous data, minor differences of intensity or hue between pixels that would be imperceptible under normal circumstances, for example. Employing motion estimation algorithms to determine which information is redundant, codecs such as MPEG-2 and MPEG-4 are crucially concerned with determining and preserving the shapes of moving objects, defined in terms of edges moving across the two-dimensional plane of the screen. But if the compression settings are off, or if there are errors in the execution of the codec's algorithms, perceptual edges are subject to effacement or exaggeration. The false edges of blocky compression artifacts might even be generated where no edge should be. Video compression therefore involves a precarious balancing act between computational and human perception, a seamful negotiation between human and non-human ways of seeing and processing visual information. The seams, usually hidden from view, are perhaps nowhere more visible today than in the controversies surrounding deepfake videos and other AI-generated imagery. Named after the Reddit user Deepfakes, who in 2017 uploaded a series of face-swapped fake celebrity porn videos featuring the likenesses of Scarlett Johansson, Gal Gadot, Taylor Swift, and others, deepfake videos use machine learning algorithms known as generative adversarial networks, or GANs, to automate the morphing and superimposition of images such as celebrities' faces onto unrelated video, such as pornographic clips or political speeches. The danger that such techniques will be used for disinformation campaigns or fake news has lately garnered increased attention, but it's telling that the most popular uses of deepfake videos so far have been in the realm of fake celebrity porn and revenge porn, almost exclusively targeting women. Taking notice of this trend, Google has recently added the category of what they call involuntary synthetic pornographic imagery to its list of banned content types. Reporting about deepfake videos emphasizes alternately that faces are, quote, seamlessly grafted onto someone else's body, or, on the other hand, that the syncing of the images, quote, isn't perfect. For example, the article widely credited with making the deepfake phenomenon known to a wider public back in December of 2017 notes with regard to the fake porn video featuring Wonder Woman star Gal Gadot, quote, in the Gadot video, a box occasionally appeared around her face where the original image peeks through, and her mouth and eyes don't quite line up to the words the actress is saying. But if you squint a little and suspend your belief, it might as well be Gadot. So imperfections are evident here, but there's leeway if you squint a little, thus signaling a real perceptual indeterminacy, a kind of gray area between what we see and what we think we see. So clearly, though, technical capabilities are evolving quickly, and more sophisticated algorithms may well erase these seams. What these discussions of the user's ability or inability to detect the edges in deepfakes and GAN-generated faces point to, however, is the low-level imbrication taking place between technological imaging processes and human perception, whereby the borders between human and non-human, living and non-living, are called into question. The generative capabilities of artificial intelligences do not constitute life, to be sure, but the microtemporal operations involved in algorithmic imaging put them into close proximity with the subperceptual processes of human embodiment, potentially altering the metabolic pathways that mark our broadly ecological entanglements, all mediated today by technological apparatuses and systems, and that structure our own pre-personal processings of time and space. Pornography presents itself as an obvious test case, as it aims to short-circuit subjective cognition, affecting viewers' bodies directly by animating sexual desire. In this way, the life-giving force of animation is plunged into a realm of indistinction, referring at once to technological processes like neural network-driven CGI, science fiction fantasies of artificial creation, and biological facts of life. In this context, edge detection reveals itself as both a technical feat as well as a human epistemological one that leads straight back to the edges of human technological interfaces, as well as gender's blurred and contested lines, all of which are wrapped up in issues of generativity, with the Proto-Indo-European root gene implicating gender, genre, genetics, and the generativity at the heart of CGI. Obviously, such videos raise serious ethical and political questions, but the notion that they constitute the sort of ontological, epistemological nexus described here might seem a little bit hyperbolic. And while it's beyond the scope of this presentation to fully substantiate these claims, a brief consideration of the phenomenology of deepfake videos might be instructive. Such videos split viewers' attention between representational and presentational levels, asking the viewer to alternate between the objects depicted and the manner or the quality of technical execution and plausibility of their depiction. At stake in both forms of regard is the question of the visual edge, that which delineates the object itself and that which belies its fabrication. This split or oscillating form of regard decenters conventional modes of spectatorial engagement, deprivileging narrative interest and sutured engrossment in the diegesis. Instead, human perception is brought into closer contact with computer vision. Object recognition in the latter involves scanning images for objects, conditions, or information. Looking at deep fakes engages the viewer in a similar task, which demands a loosening of focal depth and a flattening of the distance between representation and mediation, essentially assuming a machinic vision not unlike the computers, as it mechanically and non-subjectively scans pixels to recognize objects without regard for the difference between the image and that which it depicts. And it goes without saying that in the context, especially of involuntary pornography, this desubjectivizing of the spectator does nothing to mitigate the objectification of women's bodies. Meanwhile, the various attempts to recognize fake imagery seek to reassert the difference between human perception and computer vision. Artists seek to help humans disentangle their vision from that of AI by training our eyes to see telltale signs of computer-aided forgery, while DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and others approach the problem from the other side, turning computer vision back on itself in order to automate the process of debunking fake images. The fact that these efforts must be constantly updated points, however, to the underlying fact that human vision and machinic visuality are fundamentally co-implicated today, not just in generative adversarial networks and other AI-based visualizations, but in digital imaging processes more generally, including the much more mundane compression algorithms mentioned earlier, which subject nearly all the images we perceive to processes known as perceptual coding, the balancing act whereby imperfections in human vision are exploited to reduce file size and streaming performance. As we've seen, such processes turn crucially on the presence of edges and the means of apprehending them. Differences in brightness trigger different degrees of granularity in subdividing the visible image into ideally invisible blocks, eliminating perceptually redundant information. But then the edge at stake in edge detection, both broadly and narrowly construed, is the would-be seamless integration or synchronization of human and non-human forms of vision, whereby perceptual coding blends imperceptibly into a coding of perception. Seen in this light, Blade Runner 2049's uncanny sex scene, which joins movies like Her from 2013 and Ex Machina from 2014 in imagining erotic relations between humans, mostly white men, and artificial women created under conditions of the digital, can be seen as a concise emblem of the contingencies, exigencies, and balancing acts involved in contemporary mediated life. The scene is unusual for its sceneful display and focus on the difficulties of synchronization, which it stages as a question of images, but also of animation, a life-giving generativity that implicates biological and artificial life, both within the diegesis and without, at the interface where an embodied viewer, a holographic woman, and the image's digital infrastructures meet. All of the principal actors are engaged in operations of edge detection. Joy and Mariette share the task of matching movement based on visible outlines, a task usually carried out by video codecs, while Kay plays the role of the spectator who might need to squint a little to fulfill the gendered fantasy of seamless integration, but whose perception remains under constant threat of breakdown in the form of a visual glitch. As I've argued, this sceneful display stages not only a technological, but a profoundly philosophical problematic, and can therefore be read as a visual allegory for our post-cinematic situation more generally. It points to the uncertainties and sceneful negotiations of human and non- or post-human spatiotemporal situations that take place in, but that far exceed, mundane acts of viewing digital video. The scene unearths the deep imbrication of perceptual and technological capacities as they are distributed across human and non-human agencies, thus problematizing the relations between human perceivers and computational images that, because they operate in spatial and temporal registers that are significantly different from those of embodied humans, are in an important sense discorrelated from that perception. Most importantly, by staging this encounter as an emphatically sceneful spectacle, the scene adds an aesthetic dimension that helps us to make sense of subperceptual encounters that, because they take place in a microtemporal interval inaccessible to subjective perception, categorically elude higher order sensory presentation. The scene therefore mediates between human perceivers and the invisible conditions of life today. This is an aesthetics of edge detection, of images caught between algorithms and aesthetics. And the stakes, as I see it, couldn't be higher. So I'd like to conclude by outlining what I take these stakes to be, and in the process to give you a better picture of the book as a whole, starting with the very end, the final words of the very final chapter of the book, where I write, in this sense, perhaps nothing less than the future of the planet and the agencies that will populate it depends on how we relate today to our screens and their discorrelated images. So if you haven't read the prior 235 pages of the book, and maybe even if you have, the fireworks of this this finale will likely seem immodest at best. More probably, the claim that the future of the planet and the agencies that will populate it depends on how we relate today to our screens will seem hopelessly hyperbolic, as if I'm just exaggerating, right? Be that as it may, these are what I take the stakes of these are what I take to be the stakes of discorrelation, which I understand to involve images in a fundamentally future-oriented system of image generation, processing, and data capture, whereas cinema in its classical form was a medium of what the late philosopher Bernard Stiegler called tertiary retentions, or the techniques of externalized memory, like memorializing and recording the past. The new regime of imaging, what I refer to as post-cinema, is a medium or apparatus of artificial protensions, an anticipatory system that is implicated in the shaping of viewers' emergent perceptual and active capacities. So in other words, these new systems are not just recording the past, they are actively anticipating the future, whether it's at the level of what is going to happen right now so that Zoom can convey my movements to you without buffering, or whether it's in terms of predicting, where you're going to go tomorrow, as Google Maps might predict, or what you might want to watch on Netflix tonight, something like this. It's all future oriented. So the final sentence of chapter 2 of the book sums this up. There, right? For it is here on these screens that the future is being plotted in increasingly anticipatory processes that materially displace the perceptual present and seek in advance to format the subject of experience, to modulate subjectivity by means of the molecular metabolic forces that are activated when we press play. Accordingly, as I pointed out at the beginning, the post in post-cinema doesn't signify that cinema is dead or over, but it does say that cinema is, in a sense, a thing of the past. Quite literally, it is a recording of past events, preserved for present consumption. The post of post-cinema thus gestures toward the futural dimension by which the new regimes of imaging go beyond the present, calling it up by exceeding the temporal window of human consciousness, acting on us at a pre-subjective or molecular level, or metabolic level. They do this through mechanisms such as motion estimation in video encoding and decoding processes, in real-time upscaling and motion smoothing, and speculative execution and other microtemporal processes that anticipate and act upon our sensory apparatuses at a range of temporal scales, all the way down to the nanosecond. Discorrelated images therefore exert a properly affective force, acting on and reshaping our senses prior to the synthesis of perception. As a result, they also give rise to forms that, despite or because of their post-perceptual nature, can help us to make sense of our new situation in a world of discorrelated images. This can take a number of different forms, as I argue in analyses of images ranging from blockbuster films to artist videos to documentary and across genres such as horror, sci-fi, and Japanese role-playing games. For example, Guy Madden's online generative video project, Seances, algorithmically combines footage of reimagined lost films with digital artifacts, effects, and sources such as YouTube clips to create a unique video that is itself immediately lost or deleted following its one and only screening. So if you go to the website and you play a movie, it will generate the movie for you once, and then it will never play that movie again. It's an immediately lost movie. It's kind of a fascinating project. And this project of this, immediately lost movie heightens our awareness of digital temporality and its discorrelation from cinematic time. The project's titular seance alternates between a spiritualistic gathering and a cinematic screening, for which the French word séance is used as a matter of course, but it also comes to implicate the radically multi-stable and multi-scalar temporalities of what we now live as screen time. As another example, Yvette Granada's wonderfully weird and clunky 360-degree video, Clone, plays with tropes of cyberfeminism and xenofeminism to draw attention to the capitalistic intersection of computational technology, environmental collapse, and heteronormativity in the contemporary image. And while this may not offer us an immediate solution to the problem, I argue, in conclusion to chapter 4, that in an age of the metabolic image and the disintegration of the living subject, ironic politicization can be a powerful way to begin making sense of discorrelation. In a very different vein, Kuwaiti-born Palestinian artist Basma al-Sharif's video Home Movies Gaza offers a picture of a kind of post-cinematic realism where glitching digital televisions indexically register unseen military drones circling overhead, their inhuman visual systems producing images that are categorically invisible to human eyes. Discorrelation is here a matter of life and death in Gaza. But by showing the continuation of human and animal life, even in this environment most directly impacted by the new reality, and especially by reclaiming a material politics of this hostile reality's protocols, which are channeled into the video's own phatic mediality, Al-Sharif points tenuously but with guarded hope toward the possibility of a more humane collective future somewhere beyond the horrors of discorrelation, if we can get there. And this for me signals the political value of the aesthetic in the face of discorrelation. And everything, and I mean literally everything, depends on this. Ultimately, we might speculate what post-cinema demands of us by means of its discorrelated images is that we learn to take responsibility for our own affective discorrelations, that we develop an ethical and radically post-individual sensibility for the networked individualities through which computational, endocrinological, sociopolitical, meteorological, subatomic, and economic agencies are all enmeshed with one another in the metabolic processing and mediation of life today. And thus, in this sense, perhaps nothing less than the future of the planet and the agencies that will populate it depends on how we relate today to our screens and their discorrelated images. Thank you.
Thank you for your wonderful talk, Shane. So the talk is rich, the excellently overviewing and incorporating the key concepts and arguments of discorrelated images, the presenting the outlines of each chapter, particularly chapter 4 entitled "Right to Those Pixels," in which you discuss Blade Runner 2014 along with in terms of how the holographic scene emblematizes the fundamental discorrelation of human perception from algorithmic computational processes and how they are related to redesigning our perception and life, and in the larger context of the contemporary science fiction films that imaginatively represent artificial beings and etc. So I think it might be very helpful for us to see, for those of you who are not used to Blade Runner 2014, it may be helpful for to see the holographic sequence that Shane illustrated well, so that you have so the participant will be helpful in to coming up with their questions and so. So can I show the clip of holographic sex scene that is available from YouTube now? Before we start questions and discussion.
Yeah, great.
Okay. So yeah. So let me share my screen. Okay. So this is the holographic sequence. Okay, yeah. So let me briefly summarize, the outline of Shane's talk in Korean before for my students before we start questions and discussions. 예, 이 Discorrelated Images라는 이제 그 책의 이제 그 전반적인 개념과 주장과 챕터의 주요 내용들을 이제 잘 소개해준 강연이었습니다. 여기서 Discorrelated Images라는 개념은 사실 이제 그 탈상관화된 그 이미지라는 것으로 이제 번역될 수가 있겠고, 여기서 이제 그 탈상관성이라는 것은 말하자면 이제 어떤 이 알고리즘적이고 컴퓨테이셔널한 그런 이제 이 미디어들이 말하자면 이제 확산하게 되면서 말하자면 그런 미디어들의 이제 작용이 인간의 어떤 주체성, 인간의 어떤 이제 그 현상학적인 지각으로부터 이 단절되는 그런 이제 이 어떤 시공간적 그런 경험과 어떤 이미지의 어떤 이제 제작을 이제 말하자면 이끌고 있다는 것이죠. 결국 이제 인간과 말하자면 어떤 기계적 행위자들 사이의 어떤 상호작용이 근본적으로 변화되는 방식을 사실 가리키는 개념. 그래서 어떻게 보면 이제 그전에 어떤 시네마 시대에 말하자면 이제 이 상정되었던 어떤 주체와 이미지 간의 어떤 현상학적인 관계, 어떤 의식의 연장으로서의 어떤 관계로부터 단절되는 그런 이제 이 어떤 그런 것들로 특징 지어진 이제 이미지를 이제 어떤 이제 탈상관적 이미지라고 하고, 그것이 말하자면 이제 그 어떤 포스트 시네마의 어떻게 보면 이제 중요한 이제 그 국면이라고 이제 그 주장합니다. 그래서 그런 이제 그 이 디스코레이트 이미지가 말하자면 이제 그 이 어떤 디스코레이션으로 이제 만들어진 어떤 이미지의 사례로서 이 책의 앞에서는 이제 그 주로 이제 그런 메인스트림 필름 그에서 이제 그 활용이 되는 비선형 편집, 렌즈 플레이어 같은 이제 그 이 렌즈 플레이어나 버추얼 카메라, 그리고 이제 색 보정, 컬러 그레이딩 같은 그런 프로세스를 이제 그 소개하고, 그리고 디지털 글리치가 말하자면 이제 왜 말하자면 이제 그런 이제 이 탈상관성의 어떤 이제 엠블럼으로서 이제 작동하게 되나를 이제 설명하면서, 그리고 지금 같이 다시 한번 보신 이제 그 블레이드 러너 2049에서의 홀로그래픽 센스는 그런 이제 디스코레이션의 국면들을 집약한 그런 이제 그 어떤 이 장면으로서 이제 그 소개를 해주셨습니다. 그러면서 그런 어떤 디스코레이션의 이제 그 차원들이 말하자면 이제 그 오늘날 이제 그 적대적 신경망 네트워크를 포함한 이제 그 AI 기반의 이미지 디텍션과 이미지 프로덕션에 어떤 식으로 작용하고, 그것들이 어떻게 말하자면 이제 이 컴퓨테이셔널한 과정과 그 과정으로 이루어져 있고, 그것이 어떻게 이제 말하자면 인간의 지각과 말하자면 이제 이 변별되면서 오늘날에 우리가 이제 그 이미지를 말하자면 이제 그 식별하고 지각하고 보는 방식이 어떻게 이제 이 바꾸는가라는 이제 그 맥락 속에서 이제 논의를 해주셨고요. 그래서 이제 사실 어떻게 보면 이제 이런 딥페이크를 포함한 그런 이제 이 전반적인 이제 오늘날에 우리가 이제 지금 이제 어떤 현재 상태로 체험하고 있는 그런 이제 이 오늘날의 어떤 미디어 문화에 대한 그런 이제 이해를 어떻게 보면 이제 확장시킬 수 있는 방식으로 우리가 이제 이러한 어떤 디스코레이션한 이미 어떤 개념을 생각해 볼 수 있다라는 이제 생각을 한편으로 이제 하게 됩니다. 왜냐하면 이제 그런 딥페이크에 의한 비디오들이 말하자면은 이 어떤 그 이미지가 이제 재현되는 무엇을 재현하는가와 어떻게 재현하는가 사이를 분리시키고, 그래서 이제 어떤 이제 객체와 그 객체가 이제 이 만들어지고 객체가 이제 보여주는 방식 간의 어떤 분리를 만들고, 그러므로 해서 어떻게 보면 우리가 특히 이제 어떤 우리가 말하자면 이제 어떻게 말하자면 그 이미지를 해독하는가에 있어서 말하자면 그런 이제 딥페이크의 어떤 제작 과정에 실제로 이제 어떻게 보면 작용하는 그런 이제 기계적인 시각, 말하자면 이제 어떻게 뭐 알고리즘의 이제 어떤 이 이미지 해독의 시각을 어떤 식으로 말하자면 이제 이 의식 이전의 차원 혹은 이제 지각 너머의 차원에서 말하자면 함께 이제 거기에 연루되는가라는 점들이 이제 생각할 수 있기 때문이다라고 이제 주장을 하고 있습니다. 예, 그래서 이제 한번 토론을 이제 여러분들의 어떤 질문과 토론을 이제 한번 이제 시작을 해볼 텐데요. And my question definitely revolves around the idea of discoration, definitely because it runs the gamut of the whole book, although each case study is different and although it's interrelated. So the idea of discoration is definitely based on the assumption is that the machinic, computational, and algorithmic processes of image production and image production are fundamentally dislodged from the phenomenological ground of human perception and understanding of the moving image and information. So so definitely, it marks the fundamental break in terms of how the fundamental ontological and perceptual break in terms of how the image exists and how we perceive the image. And but we can probably expand the idea of discoration by linking it with or associating with two modes of correlation or correlationism. The birth is that although all the processes are all the algorithmic and computational processes are sub-perceptual and beyond the purview of conscious comprehension, prehension, and retention. The ultimate process by which we make sense of the computational process are still grounded in the human cognitive perceptual activities. So definitely it is a question probably related to your in progress book entitled post-cinematic bodies, because the idea of this correlation definitely allow us to expand the idea, each idea into how we understand the process of this correlation in relation to human correlation. So that we come up with the idea or replace this idea of the media spectatorship, particularly cinematic spectatorship, the previously grounded in the phenomenological assumption of sensing body, and that's the first idea of the juncture or disjuncture of this correlation and correlation. And the second idea of correlation related to definitely, as you know, the fact that correlationism is at the core of big data, machine learning, and algorithmic process. So that because the fact of big data is based on the kind of correlationism between input data and output data, based on the similarity and prediction. It also that kind of correlationism definitely that has been more and more popular in all the cultural and political domains of contemporary life. Is also extended into the correlationism between data and subject, algorithmic processes and human processes, and algorithmic understanding and human understanding. So given this situation, we may think of the paradoxical cohabitation of correlationism and this correlationism in particularly in thinking of the increasing influence of AI-based movie image production and reception, including the spread of deepfake and other recent cultural artifacts that they make us confused about the human capacity of detecting and understanding moving image in relation to the processes that we usually do not perceive. So my question definitely revolves around the expanding the idea of this correlationism in relation to the two two related ideas of correlationism. So
yeah, no, absolutely. So I would say that actually that is precisely the starting point for the next book, right? Which I recently finished writing. So it starts precisely with this question of, okay, in discorrelated images, I define discorrelation almost exclusively, as you were saying, in terms of the phenomenological correlation, right? So Edmund Husserl talks about the fundamental correlation of, I think he says, of the subject with the object, or of the noetic act with the noetic object, or something like this. But so that's my starting point. is like thinking of the relation of subjects to objects as constituted like individuals and the things that we perceive, which already takes place in a very, well, relatively slow time frame, right? So like it takes at least half a second, if not a couple of seconds, for me to constitute the relation between the things that I see and me as the perceiver, right? It's happening like faster than I can think, but still kind of it's slow, right? And it's definitely nowhere like the algorithmic processing that's happening in our computers right now so that these images can be transported, right? But of course, the correlation still happens, the phenomenological correlation, because I'm still like looking at myself in this virtual mirror, and I'm still looking at you, looking at me. You know, I mean, we are having a kind of face-to-face conversation. So there is a phenomenological correlation. But I guess what I'm trying to do in the new book is to think about precisely this other kind of correlation alongside it. So the statistical correlation that's at the heart of machine learning, you know, that produces not just deep fakes, but also things like, you know, stable diffusion and DALL-E 2 and all these synthetic images that are based on correlations, right? It's based on tagging as many images as you can and correlating statistically like the image with the description so that new things can be generated. But it's also at the heart of like facial recognition and all of these processes that have these deeply unsettling political uses and valences of surveillance and all of these things, right? So my starting question is like, what is the relation between discorrelation as a fundamental, you know, as a phenomenological process and a kind of recorrelation along the lines of statistical correlation, right? And what I'm arguing is that phenomenological discorrelation, by breaking down the perceptual bond, opens up a kind of affective embodied temporality that's faster than perception. And it's precisely there that statistical correlation gets inserted into our bodies, right? So, you know, people write about, say, algorithmic bias, right? Where algorithms are biased in terms of race and gender, right? They give false, like, kind of, well, you know, based on their training sets, right? That's what they're trained to see. They're trained to see white people, for example, or they're trained to think about particular normative ideas of gender. So what I'm arguing, though, is that it's not just about algorithmic bias. It's about when that algorithmic bias gets inserted into our bodies ourselves, right? So that there's a kind of, if what I'm arguing makes sense in discorrelated images, that the image anticipates us, it runs ahead of our subjectivity, then this pre-formatting of our bodies is like a deeply unsettling political fact, right? So it's not just that Google is going to give me bad search results because it's trained on, you know, biased data, but that the, you know, the kind of increasingly deep metabolic intervention that new technologies have in our bodies. So, I mean, I'm thinking of everything like, say, from Apple Watch, right? That tracks my heart rate, it tracks the oxygen level in my blood, all of these things. It tracks my activity, my caloric output. That is already imbricated in this system where these biases can be implanted in my body, which I think has far-reaching consequences for racialization, for gendering and normative and, you know, normative ways of being embodied in this world, right? So that it's not just a matter of like, you know, demanding better representation on screen. It's about like, who's going to demand? Have they not already been pre-formatted in some way, right? So I don't know. That's exactly how I'm coming at it in this new book, and I'm thinking about like, virtual reality, not just as constructing spaces, but as operating times that are about embodied movement that have to be standardized in a sort of way in order for virtual reality to work. Or, things like, Peloton or, smart exercise machines as things that are capturing all this data about our metabolisms and using them to create images on the screen and to distribute them into networks that eventually might even fall into the hands of, say, the companies you work for, who might find out something about your habits, whether you're healthy or not, or your insurance company or the state or whatever, right? So these are like deeply political moments. I'm trying to trace those alongside the ways that artists respond to these systems, mostly in video art.
So what kind of videos are you interested in that context?
Yeah, like so one of the pieces I look at is by Ian Chang. I don't know if you know him. Yeah, he's an artist who works with game engines and basically makes video games that play themselves. So you don't have an interface. And Chang's work for me is very useful for first opening up that space of feeling disconnected from the automated agencies, right? Because it creates this desire in you to interact with it. And you know exactly where you would interact with it if you had a video game controller, for example. But it denies that interaction to you. And so it makes you feel in a very direct and embodied way the lack of agency that you have as a body, right? And then from there, I'm looking at, let's see, like Hito Steyerl, her Factory of the Sun, which plays on Donna Haraway's idea of the machines made of technology, of sunshine, that she writes about very early on, right? But writing from around where I live in Silicon Valley, and about the ideology of these light machines made of light, right? That have no material impact, but obviously they do somewhere in the world, right? And there it's about capturing motion. So I don't know if you've seen, but Factory of the Sun, it's an installation that's set in a motion capture studio, and it depicts people whose motion is being captured for a video game. It's a very playful video, but it's about something very serious, namely the abstraction of motion from bodies, right? In order to build models of motility, of motion, that can be separated from a particular empirical body and applied to a new virtual or maybe even material one, right? So things like that are at the kind of at the front. And then I'm looking at some like virtual reality pieces that think about race in a different way. So there's the neurospeculative Afrofuturist, neurospeculative Afrofuturist something lab, where it's about a so okay, I guess one of the things that I've been interested in virtual reality is virtual mirrors. Like, what does it mean to be in front of a virtual mirror? And it challenges you to both like do the mapping that I was talking about, in Blade Runner, between these two characters, but it's actually you in front of this other thing, and it's kind of undercutting your own perception in order to recode that perception. And in this case, it's about a Black girl who's getting these extensions in her hair that give her like kind of I don't know, well, kind of a hallucinatory state, right? And she goes into the mirror itself, and so you follow this girl into this mirror. It's a very interesting thing that I think challenges questions of virtual reality as empathy machine. I don't think it's anything about that at all. It's about something else. It's about experiencing embodiment in real time as somehow different from your own.
Yeah, that definitely I agree with your view that virtual reality is not the immediately kind of operating empathy machine, because my argument in the second chapter of my book, Documentary Extended Build, where I discuss BI documentary, is that and immersion and presence are the kind of composite effect based on the dialogue or implication of human embodiment, and the kind of vision, the kind of pre-constructed vision, constant vision pre-constructed by a machinic or the mechanical process. So by the way, there is a huge retrospective on Hitler's tire MMC in Seoul this year. So the museum also published by the huge catalog entitled A Sea of Data, and featuring the essays by Benjamin Britten, Laura Arthur, the Wendy John, and me, and some. So I hope
cool.
you'll be able to catch up with that later.
Do you know how long it's running?
Oh, the exhibition already ended, but the catalog was published. So so if you want, so I'll be able to request the curator in charge of the exhibition to share the catalog with you.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Yeah,
that would be great.
Although in PDF. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so let us open the floor for the discussion and question.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for this fascinating talk. And then I'm wondering about the diegetic and non-diegetic complications of the sound in the thing you analyzed wonderfully for us. Because when you sort of analyzed because of the sort of presentation limitations, so I think the sound was muted. But when later on the Dr. Kim show us the thing, then we see clearly there's non-diegetic music in the singer, and also non-diegetic and diegetic complications of the sound. So I'm wondering if you can talk about the dimension of discorrelated sound into your idea of the discorrelated images.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's one that I've been asked before, and I don't have a great answer to it. I think it's something that I've been struggling with, is to think about sound in a kind of, well, in relation to the argument about discorrelation. I don't know. For me, it feels very complex to analyze sound, because sound doesn't operate as like distinct objects. Usually it kind of surrounds us, and so obviously there are films and media artworks that really play with that and throw it kind of out of our expectations, which I think you could see as a kind of discorrelation. I don't know if it was really operative here. Do you think it was? I mean, the synthetic sound, you could say definitely it's being processed by the same kinds of algorithmic processes as the images, as the kind of composited images. And to that extent, yes, I mean, definitely discorrelation, is happening both at the sonic and the visual once it's in computational processing. But I don't know, it's harder for me to like feel it. You know what I mean? Like it's harder for me to identify it, or for me to have a kind of self-reflexive relation to the discorrelation of sound, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think maybe a relate. I'm not sure if it's a related question or not. Is the how to analyze, for example, the VR experience?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the VR experience is also like sound is also surround us, and then it's immersive, etc. So I think you're the expert to sort of point us towards some possibilities of analyzing the VR works. Yeah.
Well, I'm not an expert in sound studies, and that's where I would start, would be with people like Jonathan Stern, also like Don Idey's early work on phenomenology of sound. I think that's where I would start by thinking or looking to see what kinds of like mechanisms, what kind of methods can they give us. So far, I've been thinking about the visual, but also the haptic more than the visual. And I think that the audio, you know, is close to the haptic. It's close to, you know, before the specular in a way. So I guess maybe I'll have to rethink like what I've been thinking about in terms of the haptic. I've been rethinking some of the things that Merleau-Ponty is doing in the phenomenology of perception, and in later work where he's like rethinking Lacan's mirror stage, and he's saying, okay, we're looking at ourselves looking in the mirror, but like, you know, I at once have to be aware that I am here, but I'm also not there, but I am there, and I am here where somebody else could see me. But for him, that's a moment of specularization that is already happening on the basis of a much more distributed haptic sense, right? And maybe thinking the audio through that haptic register would be a way of thinking both, you know, the lack of grounding, like the lack of personal ownership of sound, in a way that like the body is also not owned, you know. It's like part of the world. It's out there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. 저 질문이 있으신 분은 뭐 저기 영어든 한국어든 저기 저 챗박스에 치시면은 그 한국어로 이제 트랜스레이션 해가지고 저기 쉐인하고 대화하도록 하겠습니다. But those of you have questions or comments on Shane's talk, and you can also use the chat box menu, whether in English or Korean.
I think I saw a question.
Yeah, actually, I have a question. First of all, thank you for your rich talk. And it was really interesting for me when you registered digital glitches or lens flares as emblems of discorrelation. But these days, immersive image environment and virtual reality, especially in industrial locations, seem to be devoting themselves to create a contemporary type of correlation or embodiment other than in traditional narrative cinemas. So in this sense, the digital glitches or lens flares can be their enemies to be eliminated or problems to be solved. So, and I think this is possible that the industry and technology would ultimately achieve that. So I was wondering, how do you diagnose the future of these kinds of emblems of this correlation in terms of this incessant development of technology? And will they be totally gone in the end or keep recurring in another forms? And do you think their influence on human perception you've mentioned before will be maintained despite these kind of technological projects to erase them?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it's a difficult one. So personally, I mean, this is something that I've been really thinking through in the new book, right? Because I feel like, I mean, I think you're right, you know, I mean, the seams that I've been pointing to are going to be erased very quickly, right? They're not going to be visible for long. And for me, I think it's really a political question of holding on to the difference, right, between embodied sensation and like digital simulation. But how do you do it, right? And I don't know. I mean, I think that even if, well, the way that I'm approaching virtual reality, for example, is in terms of this kind of system that is trying to, you know, replace a particular body schema with another one, right? And I don't know that that can ever really be complete because of the kind of primacy of the you know, of the tactile in a way. Like, I think though that it's going pretty quick and it'll be difficult to maintain a kind of distance from that. But I guess I just keep on pointing to those situations like virtual mirrors where it both serves to confirm the connection, the correlational connection between a person and their avatar, but it also can never quite, you know, overcode the initial kind of embodied relation that we have to the world. Is my feeling, right? Maybe it's my hope. Maybe it's more a hope than anything else. Yeah, but yeah, I mean that is like the difficult question, because I think a lot of politics and political like ramifications ride precisely on that perceptual question. Yeah.
Thank you. That Sang-Hyung's question made me also ask a brief question about your thought on the dimension of affectivity or the neurological or cerebral process in terms of discorrelation, because so I'm thinking of for example, Catherine's recent work on the reconceptualizing cognition in in non-human and distributed ways, but her ultimate argument is that cognition is not solely located within the human capacity, but can be also found in non-human agencies in terms of the subconscious and neurological or processes. So I was wondering, probably in your next book project, how to see this neurological approach to the reconfiguring the work of human cognition and brain consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I don't develop it a whole lot precisely in those terms. I mean, it's mostly a phenomenological argument or a post-phenomenological argument. But I do agree completely with Kate Hales about this kind of distributed, you know, the cognitive non-conscious, right? The way that is operating, like in kind of, you know, in a distributed recoding of the cognitive process. And that's, I mean, that's how I actually conceive of what I'm arguing in Discorrelated Images and in the new book, when I talk about metabolic processes, right? Which are both kinds of like cognitive processes, as well as embodied processes, as well as environmental and systemic processes, right? So for me, like the work of the metabolic, in a way, is precisely about spreading the idea of cognition, and of especially the cognitive non-conscious outside of the brain, right?
Thank you. I think we have a couple of minutes more, so I think we are still open to receiving one more last question before we wrap up the session. So. Yeah, so So please raise your hand, or so on the raise your hand icon, use the raise your hand icon, or the put something in the chat box or whatever. Yeah. 찬용. Yeah.
Hello, Professor Kim. It's good to see you via Zoom, and
Yeah.
thank you again for
Mhm.
making this event public so that I can access as an outsider. And thank you, Professor Denson, for your illuminating talk. So in the interest of time, I'll make my question very short, but it's more about the terminology here, about the diegesis and or the adjective form diegetic, because do you think your notion of, or should I say your deployment of the notion of diegesis in your book kind of can coexist with your central notion of discorrelated images? Because I'm asking this question because of your notion of distributed network, and I wonder if is it even possible to draw a boundary between diegetic and non-diegetic to begin with, as we are starting from this type of notion. So I know it's such a messy question, but I would appreciate if you could share your thoughts.
It's not a messy question at all. And I only barely hinted at it here, but if you look at chapter 1 of discorrelated images, that's actually the first thing that I argue in a way. I mean, it's not the first thing, but it's like one of the first things that I argue in that chapter is that something like the digital lens flare already shows that the lines between diegetic and non-diegetic are no longer tenable at all, right? So like the first act of like identifying discorrelation is in dissolving the diegetic and the non-diegetic, because you know the diegetic is also somehow this simulated materiality, is simulated mediality, that it's like recursively like, you know, the mise en abîme or something. So yeah, I agree with you. Like it's not tenable. I still have to you know, I think it makes sense to use the terms analytically still, just to make an analytical difference in order to show that the difference itself dissolves upon closer inspection, right? But I agree with you 100%. Like once we start talking about these distributed processes, like then how would we, like according to what subjectivity and according to what relational position would we draw the lines? And that's precisely my point, is that we can't. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Now, so it's the time to wrap up. But you know, it was a very fruitful and enjoyable and insightful the lecture and the discussion regarding Shane's very important contribution to cinema media studies in the context of post-cinematic and computational media age. So the next event will host Professor Han Sang-Kim and Aju University, focusing on his his book that was published this year, and as part of Harvard University's Asian monographic series. The event will take place 11/11, the Friday evening. So the first in-person event of our colloquium series. So we'll announce it on social media and other means. For the details, including the starting time and place. So let us have give a hand to the Professor Shane Denson for having the precious time with us.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Ji-hoon, and thank you all for coming and for your excellent questions. It was a lot of fun. It's a little bit late here. It's getting late at night, but it's interesting to talk across 16 time zones. So Yeah, it was great. And I hope at one point we can do this in person. Yeah.
Definitely next year, hopefully next year, SCMS in Denver and
Yeah,
wherever. Yeah.
exactly.
Thank you. 예,
Cool.
마치겠습니다. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.